Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It's your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any of our Watchbox platforms. Reach out to me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Today, we are discussing a 38mm platinum FP Journe Chronometre Resonance, also known as the Resonance 1. This is the original version of the watch. It's launched in 2000, an extremely early production model. It includes the distinctive 38mm case, which was the original size, a size discontinued after 2015. These smaller cases are highly sought, and there's a lot that marks this as one of the early models, and we'll go through all of that. But at 38mm, the watch is 8.8mm thick by 44.5mm lug-to-lug, with a 20mm spacing between the lugs. On my 16cm circumference wrist, the watch wears flat, flush, and comfortable, easily sliding underneath a dress cuff or a tight sleeve. No problems there. You can see from over the top how much clearance I have, and then you can see down the barrel, as I like to say. There's plenty of clearance on each side, so you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference. Taking a quick look at the strap. The strap is considerably newer than the watch. It is a FP Journe factory strap, large rectangular scale alligator leather in dark brown on the top, semi-gloss finish, a monotone stitch, and a folded edge. You can see the underside is small round scale alligator. The idea of using gator on the bottom instead of the more common calf is that the strap lasts longer. You could see that the pull tab spring bars are present and correct, so you can remove the strap using only your fingernail, no need for tools. And then curved spring bars are used, so there's no impediment to the motion of the strap. It can be drilled relatively close to the case on both sides, which shrinks the distance between the strap pivot centers. Again, excellent for a smaller wrist. An uncommon feature, an FP Journe full deployant clasp. Most Journe watches are on pin buckles. This one features a full factory upgrade white gold clasp. You can see that the color is a little bit warmer in comparison to the ultra white platinum of the watch, and you can see that the buckle, fascinatingly, is made of platinum, and the actual folding component is made of the harder white gold. Rolling back to the case, it is all of platinum. You can see the distinctive Journe case shape with a domed bezel, a flat case flank, integrated Calatrava style lugs, and a mid-case defined by the boundary between the case back lip and the bezel lip. You can see the double dimple knurled crown used for winding and setting the watch. And as you can see, it too is a warmer tone than the platinum of the case. It's made of white gold. Rolling over to the reset trigger, this resonance phenomenon will couple the two movements in this case after about 7 to 10 minutes, which means that you will have a resonance chronometer, but the seconds hands will not be aesthetically pleasing. They will not be synchronized after that roughly 10-minute span, so you use the flyback to reset them both to 0, and now they are in sync, and resonance will keep them coupled. The dial of the watch is a lovely matte rose gold, and as you can see, these early Journe dials, it's almost as though they have a little bit of a varnish over the gold base layer, because you can see they have a gradient over different parts of the dial. The intensity of the color, as well as the impression of sort of a floating or luminous layer, it varies, and this is how these dials age. It's not a sign of oxidation or damage. It's just the way they were manufactured. The early Journe watches were very handmade, and now 2 decades later, we can really see that there is a tangible patina on almost all of them, making just about every one of these older Journes somewhat unique. You can also see that there are 2 dials, both in 12-hour format. They can be set to separate time zones using the one crown up at 12 o'clock. That one crown also winds both of them. The single power reserve indicator holds true for both, so you wind both barrels at the same time. You can see on the reverse side that the crown wheel drives 2 ratchet wheels. There are 2 separate drivetrains, 2 separate escapements, and then 2 separate balances, and there's no mechanical link between them. The emanations of lost energy from the escapements and the balances, they actually are responsible for coupling the 2 balances the way pendulums or metronomes left in proximity will eventually synchronize to each other, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So you can set each of these dials separately, and the power reserve works backwards, so it indicates the hours since you last wound it. So when it indicates 0, like a vintage marine chronometer, that means it has been 0 hours since you fully wound the watch. Now, the dial is made of gold. The sub-registers are actually stamped brass, which are then galvanized this silver white. And you can see there's a black polished steel bezel around each of these sub-registers. You can also see the screws on the dial side, an early Journe styling cue that was at first criticized and later copied by everyone. It can be tough to be a pioneer, but the dial side bolts have become an industry institution after Mr. Journe broke the ground. Taking a look at the case back, you can see that it has the maker's mark of Eleanor, which was a factory outside of Paris that made Journe's cases from 1983 with his first pocket watch until 2008 when he bought the company and moved it to Geneva, which is why you have ultimately both the Swiss and the French hallmarks, as well as that somewhat diamond-shaped Eleanor maker's mark. The case passed through both France and Switzerland on its way to your wrist. Now, here's a feature that was discontinued about mid-2005. The stamping of the case back with the case's year of manufacture, that generally corresponds fairly closely to the watch's year of manufacture, though it does stand only for the case. The watch would have been built somewhat later. So you can have a 02 case and the watch can be built in 03 or 04, but that's what that little stamp means, and R is the reference for the watch resonance. The movement. This is the earliest version of the resonance caliber, and as you can see, it is made of brass. The brass movement is coated with silver rhodium, which is why it is not that golden hue we associate with brass. 2 separate drivetrains, 2 separate power reserves of 42 hours. Each balance is free sprung to take and hold a precise regulation. Free sprung is more stable and allows for a more precise regulation via variable polar moment nuts on the spokes of the balance than a flat, or I should say a mobile stud. So the mobile stud system is less stable, which is why Journe uses free sprung on all of his watches. 6 position adjustment for each side, and then the idea is that because they are going to resonate and become non-mechanically coupled to each other, these balances, which beat away at 6 beats per second, will eventually synchronize. So if one is made to run fast, the other will slow it down and vice versa. And that's ultimately the idea behind the resonance phenomenon, self-regulation. You can also see that it's nicely decorated with mirrored bevels that were actually a little bit nicer than what would be introduced a few years later on the rose gold. Also black polished screws, Côte de Genève across the bridges, engine turning on the base plate, a satination for all of the wheels, and you can see there's a rose gold pinion screw at center that's used along with that black polished rack to adjust the distance between the balance to achieve resonance. You can also see that the barrel bridge for this early version of the watch was different from the rose gold version. It's not just a different material. This barrel bridge here features 2 ratchet wheels and clicks visible. Those would later be submerged underneath the bridge, and you just see the pivot points for the barrels. So not just a different material for this movement, but also a different architecture. And of course, the brass movements were phased out in roughly mid-2004. This is an investment grade watch, and it can be called vintage as it is materially different than what FP Journe produces today. Today he's making about 950 watches a year, but back in the early 2000s, it was less than half that, meaning that these watches will always be collectible by virtue of scarcity and historical importance. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.